All right. Hey, Jim, good to see you again.
Rich, good morning. How are you?
Excellent. Excellent. Glad that
Awesome.
you could join us and fit us in your day. And
Of
I
course.
know there's a lot of people here looking from hearing from you. For those of you who don't know Jim, Jim is one of the original Luminar experts. He's been using it from the very beginning. He produces more YouTube tutorials, sometimes I think, than we even do. He's always on it, and he always has amazingly hard questions for me. And so I know that he digs in and truly understands the product and loves to share what he learns. So, Jim, thank you for your passion. Tell folks, maybe two things they don't know about you. I know they know that you're on YouTube and they watch your stuff, but how did you get
Gosh.
into photography, or, what really makes you passionate about photography?
Wow. So how did I get into photography? So it's the short version is I actually through work met Trey Ratcliffe. Everybody knows Trey, pioneer in HDR photography, and he used to live here in Austin. And we had a meeting and we were talking about some stuff, and then he said, "Yeah, I do this photography thing on the side." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." And he's like, "Oh, you should just go to my blog, da da da, and check it out." And I'm not exaggerating. I went to his blog, and this was 2009, I think.
Right.
I went to his blog and looked at his photos, and it was like a jaw dropper. I was like, "What? What kind of camera do you have?" That was my first question.
Right.
I was
Right.
like, "It's not the camera." Anyway, so that story. But
Yeah.
yeah, so he kind of got me into it, and I looked at it and I was like, "I want to do that. I want to do that." And I didn't have the gear. I had no knowledge. I really had no idea what I was doing, and I started trying to make HDR photos, and just sort of gone off in my own direction now. But that's kind of how I got into it. So
That's
kind of an
that's
accident,
awesome.
to be honest.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Well,
it was a lot of fun.
what do you want to show us today? I want to get out of your way because no one wants to hear me talk, but they want to learn from you.
Oh yeah, no worries at all. Let me share my screen. Can you see that? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So what I want to do here, I've got a few images, and I'll walk through whatever we have time to walk through. Now, I've already this is an image taken outside of Copenhagen, Denmark. I already cropped it, and I removed a little bird that was in the water over here. But as I have said many times, two of my favorite things, and I think, frankly, the most important things about photo taking and editing is you're trying to manage light and color. And so that's kind of how I approach photos. And so I'm always looking at how do I manipulate, slash manage, massage, whatever word you want to use. How do I adjust the light to get it looking the way I want it to look? And then also color. And I tend to do those in that order, but not always. Sometimes I bounce kind of between them. And so this is a photo, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of an edit here and just kind of show you what I normally do. Um, if you're newer to Luminar, one of the first things I recommend doing, in addition to just playing with all the tools, because you can always reset them and start over, nothing's permanent, but I recommend going into Enhance AI and using this Accent AI slider and just dragging it to see what it does to your photo. Because as you can see here, as I move it back and forth, you get a lot of bang for your buck, right? It's kind of what I call the one slider to rule them all. It's kind of a simple but powerful slider that does quite a bit.
And
And then
Jim,
for
you
this
made a
photo, I'm actually
casual
gonna,
statement there that I want to reinforce. You said
yeah,
nothing is destructive.
yeah,
Luminar is the only tool on the market that does these type of edits to a raw file. Like Photoshop has to turn it into pixels.
right.
Lightroom can't do it because it can only work on raw files. There's not another editor on a planet that could do glows and structure and sky replacement while still keeping the raw image in place, which means you never have to lose the flexibility of raw.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Great point. So, like I said, if you're fairly new, I recommend trying those sliders. And even though I'm reasonably comfortable with pretty much every tool in Luminar, I use this tool all the time because again, it's powerful and simple, and it gives me great results without a lot of time. I don't always start with that, but in this image I did. And then the next thing I'm going to do is cool this off. And I'm going to go a bit cooler than you would kind of expect. And there's a reason why, and I'll get to that here in a couple of minutes. But I use light tool on, I'm not exaggerating, every image. It's normally where I start, except in this case, of course. And I'm going to pull, after adding a little contrast, pull the highlights down. Now that's pretty blue, and that's okay. I'm going to talk about why in a minute. But the next thing I want to do is get into curves. And this is a fairly advanced kind of component of a photo editor like Luminar. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking a whole lot about it. I'm going to do a fairly simple, what they call S curve. And all I'm really doing here is primarily just adjusting contrast, creating a higher contrast image. And so you can kind of see what that's done to the image already. We've gone from fairly flat, and you can see the bird there that I erased before starting this. There it is before, and there it is now. So very impactful, very colorful, and in fact, I would say over the top colorful, but I'm gonna make some adjustments around that here in a minute. Another tool that I love is Structure AI. And in this case, what I want to do is really soften up some aspects of the photo, primarily the sky and water, because I like kind of a dreamy kind of look sometimes. And again, when I get to the end, some of this will make a little bit more sense than it may right now. But another great feature of Luminar, of course, is the masking. And so I'm going to come in and I'm actually going to erase this negative structure. So that smoothing I just applied, I'm going to erase it from the building, and I'm going to do this really quickly and not super accurately. So I'm just going to kind of move my mouse over a few areas here. I recommend taking your time. I'm doing this fast, of course, because we're live, but all I wanted to do there is basically mask in or out, in this case, that negative structure from the buildings. And so I softened up the sky and the water. That's what it looked like before. And that's what it looks like now. So a little bit softer, a little bit dreamier. And if you've followed any of my tutorials, you know I kind of like that kind of look. So having done that, I'm now going to color. And again, another great feature of Luminar, of course, is that you can come in here and get into this HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, or luminance. You got a drop-down menu here. I'm in saturation. And what I want to do is go to luminance. And if you look here in the bottom right corner, there's a little bit of green grass. And then, of course, with the sky and the water, there's just a whole lot of blue. So what I want to do is I want to darken them. And that's what the luminance will do for me. So I'm going to do something like a -50 there and like a -70 on the blue. And now it's looking really dark, but that's by design. And the reason why is because I'm going to make this a black and white. And one of the things I love about Luminar is all these various tools that allow you to really customize the look of your photos. And while I tend to be kind of a big color guy at heart, I've really gotten into monochromes. I have a lot of fun with them. And I also like dramatic photos. And I always feel like, hey, I can make a really dramatic black and white that in color doesn't look that real, kind of like this, looks a bit over processed. But when you convert to black and white, it looks kind of classy, right? And so I like to do that with my photos. Luminar gives me so much power to do that. And then what I'm going to do is further darken that green and slightly pull down the blues as well. And so now I've got, I think, a fairly nice looking monochrome photo. And this is really, the next two filters are the ones I'm really going to talk about while I'm here on the deep dive session today. And I heard you talking about it, Rich, right at the end of Jack's session. And by the way, his astro work is just fantastic. Super contrast. It's an incredibly amazing tool. I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's amazing. I love this tool.
It is. I use it all the time. I just absolutely adore this tool. And the truth is, you know, especially if you're kind of new to it, I recommend just dragging the sliders and just kind of seeing what they do to your photo. And so I'm going to drag them about like that. But then after you've done that, I recommend coming back to the balance. You don't have to do it in this order, but as you move the balance around, you can see what this does to the photo. And so because I'm making a bit more of a contrasty, dramatic photo, I want the highlights balance to go left. I'm going to take the mid-tone balance to the right. If I go too far, it's too dark. If I go too far the other way, it gets a little bit too light. I'm going to go a little bit like that. Actually, I think I'm going to change my mind. I think I'm actually going to go a little bit more left, and then shadows balance as well. In this case, I'm going to go a little bit higher. And let me show you the amount of impact that this slider or this tool and its sliders have had on the photo. There it is before. I think a nice looking monochrome, somewhat dramatic. And now I think it really pops where that castle is really standing out, and I've created a bit brighter sky behind it and a bit more dramatic look to it. So the super contrast, absolutely incredibly powerful and useful. And again, just experiment. That's the best way to learn these tools. So that was one tool. The second tool I want to talk about, I mentioned managing light and color. Super contrast is a great one for light. And for me, toning, and Rich, I know you like this tool a lot. Toning is fantastic for color. Now, you might be thinking, it's black and white, Jim. So I'm kind of going for a true toning look, kind of a, you know, a cyan kind of look. And so what I'm going to do is go for a little bit of a blue overall, which for me is about a 230 on the hue. And then highlights, I'm just going to drag that. I just kind of, to quote Kevin LaRue, I quote him all the time, season to taste. He said that to me many times. So I'm just going to drag my hue over here to about 230 now in the shadows, and drag saturation, season to taste. And I've got a nice, I like to call it the moonlight look. It's kind of a silvery gray, but if I turn this off, you can see that's a classic black and white. And now I've got kind of a softer, more subtle looking kind of monochrome. So that's the entire edit there, Rich. And I really, walk through some base elements to get my photo kind of started, and then popped into super contrast and of course toning to really kind of put my final stamp on it. So that's what it looked like before, and there it is now. And if I drag the slider here, you can see that we've had quite an impact on the photo, and I think made something that's, in my opinion, quite nice looking. So.
And Jim, I'm sure you do this, but could you reinforce to people, like if you come up with a look that you like, could you just show them how to save that as their own custom template so they can access it again?
Yeah, in fact, I should save this one. That's a great idea.
Because I like this one. I might even ask you for it later.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, you can have it. So you just click here and you can hit save, and then that'll save it as a template. And then you can come in here and, whoops, hang on. My Zoom window is in the way. When you click in templates, you can go to my templates, and here it is. So now I can save this, I can rename it, and I'm gonna call this monochrome something another, if I could spell. Monochrome, whatever, monochrome, how about monochrome? So, and you can see I've got some other templates I've saved and edited and that sort of thing. So now I've got that, so I could stick that same look as Rich just said, or template, on top
and,
of it.
and if you click that heart icon, then it's going to also be in your favorites if it's one you want to use a lot, so it's even easier to find.
Absolutely, yep. And there it says, no, it's in favorites, and if I hover there, you can see it says removed from favorites. So yeah, absolutely. So great point, Rich. I hadn't thought of saving it, so I'm glad that you you brought that up. So any questions on this one? If not, I'll pop into another image.
No, I think that looks great. People are loving what you're showing for sure.
Oh, good. Okay. I think I'm going to do a quick one here. And this is basically just, as you can see, a cityscape. And I love to shoot cityscapes. It's probably my favorite subject matter. And I love to shoot it at the edges of the day. So sunrise or blue hour in the morning, or sunset or blue hour in the evening. This is an evening shot over the Charles Bridge in Prague. And again, I'm going to kind of reinforce the same tools that I talked about, which primarily were super contrast and of course toning, because for me it's about light and color. And I think this is an example of where we often end up like with photos like this, right? You're shooting into a sky that's brighter than the foreground, and therefore you got a bit of a darker foreground and a bit of a brighter sky. And so in this case, I'm once again going to start with Accent AI, and that's because it does such a great job of helping me to brighten that foreground and kind of bring that to life, give me a little bit better visibility into it. And of course, I want to somewhat darken the sky because it's a little bit too bright. And so all I'm trying to do is balance the light, and these tools are a great way to start doing that. After that, I'm going to go into light and give it a little bit of temperature and a little bit of tint. And, again, just kind of season to taste, and then a little bit of smart contrast. I think maybe around a 20. And of course, the highlights are a little bit bright, so I'm going to pull them down, but I don't want to overdo too much of that. And that's because, once again, I'm going to go down here. Oops. I'm going to go down to the bottom and get my super contrast, which, of course, as you already know, I love. So I'm going to do mid to high 30s here in the highlights, midtones, kind of mid 20s, and shadows, about halfway. And then once again, come back and kind of massage that a little bit with the balance sliders. And, really every photo is somewhat different, of course. And so I recommend just kind of experimenting, moving these sliders around, seeing what they do for you, and see how they impact your image. But let me turn this off and show you what we're able to do. There it is before super contrast. And then of course, afterwards, kind of brighten the foreground, brighten kind of that tier of the city in the background, and somewhat darken the sky. So again, it's a rearranging of the light by using the super contrast tool. And so I think that that looks really nice. Now, what many people will do is go over here on a sunset and go to landscape and use golden hour. And by many people, I include myself in that. I use it all the time, and it's fantastic. And as you can see, it gives a nice little warm kind of golden glow to the photo. But one of the things I recommend experimenting with is also trying toning in combination with golden hour. And in this case, I'm going to go just to the highlights, and I'm going to give that, maybe a 30 or something like that. And you can see how that's really starting to kind of perk up that light and give me that nice warm look. Again, I'm hitting just the highlights. If I wanted to hit the shadows, I could come in and do a little bit of that. In this case, I don't want to go very high. And in fact, I've chosen not really, actually, you know what, maybe I'll do a tiny bit, maybe something low like that for the shadows, but I definitely wanted to hit the highlights. And comparing this to the, what it looked like before using this one, if I turn this off, you can see it's got a bit more blue in it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love my blues, but it's sunset and golden hour, which is kind of what this is. You kind of want to bring up those golden tones. So the golden hour tool is, of course, great for that. But again, I think toning is fantastic, especially when you hit the highlights. It gives you that nice warm pop, as you can see there. And so that's really all I would do to this photo. I mean, pretty straightforward and simple, but if you take a look at the before and after, there's just a massive difference in the color and the light. I think we've got better visibility into, the parts of the photo I want to see, which is, for me, the bridge is kind of leading my eye across the river. You can see it's brighter and warmer. And then I'm looking at St. Vitus Cathedral and the cityscape primarily on the right. So my eye kind of goes up the bridge and kind of over, and it takes in that light. So it's warmer and a little bit brighter, I think, in the areas where I want it to be brighter. Okay. So I think that overall is a quick and easy, powerful edit. And again, a lot of that comes down to super contrast and toning. So if I turn this off, you can see that the photo, there you go, it's a bit flatter. And then if I turn off the toning as well, you're going to see it's a bit less warm. And so that's what it was like before adding those two key tools. And that's why I'm kind of talking about those two in today's session, because I think they're really powerful. And I don't know how many people are comfortable using them or have used them, but experiment.
Those are great. We've had a couple of people asking about sharpening and details. I don't want you to go deep, but would you mind just giving a quick overview of like maybe structure and details, especially on a shot like this where you have so many rich details, how you get that image feeling sharp? You did the first part, like, the use of proper contrast is the first way to make a sharp looking image.
Right. Yeah. So Structure AI, it's a fantastic tool and I love it. And, one of the great things I think people don't know about it is that it's human aware. So if I had a portrait, I could apply that and it's not really going to impact the skin like it's going to impact the rest of the photo. But it does add a little, I use the word crunch. I don't know what else to call it. If I go too far, it gets over the top. Obviously it's applying everywhere. I don't want it everywhere, but a nice little pop of that, like maybe a 30. And then again, just use the brush, go into paint mask, make sure you're on mask there. And I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. And what I would do is just paint this adjustment into the cityscape, right? The man-made stuff. So I'm going to hit some of these buildings and then kind of hit the bridge. And I'm going kind of fast. Again, I recommend I recommend taking your time and kind of doing it, applying it a bit more accurately than I am. But I skipped the trees over there on the left-hand side. I don't want to overdo too much structure or sharpening, simply because it can be fairly distracting for a viewer. But now that I've got the mask in place, I can adjust this up or down. I can boost it if I really wanted to go crunchy, but I don't really want to do that. I'm going to go kind of low, like maybe a 30. But here's the cool thing. Now that I've applied that mask, I can copy that mask. And then if you want to apply details, it's unlikely you're going to apply details in the water or the sky. So you can just come down here to details. You can make, some adjustments here with details or sharpening, however you want to do that. And then just come into the masking and you can paste the mask. So if I hit the / key, you'll see that the mask has been applied, or basically copied and then pasted onto this tool from Structure AI. And that's giving me the ability to apply it in the exact same places and just, in other words, build a mask once, use it as many times as you need to. So I think that's given a nice little pop to the image. I think that was a great addition. So thanks for the suggestion. Any other questions about that?
Go a long way. No, you're doing great. People are loving this. And they were asking when do you sharpen and denoise? And I guess what I would throw out is you might do it early on, but it's usually one of the last things you do, right, Jim? Like you kind of get all your editing done and then you do sharpening and denoise. And it's so critical to zoom actually to 200% these days, because with these high DPI monitors, if you don't zoom to 200%, you're not actually seeing the noise or the edges at actual pixels.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's very true. Actually, I also just thought of something else I could do to this photo. But yeah, I do denoise and sharpening very late in my process. I'm pretty much, I focus on light first and then color. And then for me, the third piece is detail, which would be, applying details and sharpening. I tend to do those last. And so, that is kind of my approach. And the other thing I thought of here is local masking. So this is an example where a local mask could come in really handy, because now that I've sharpened and added those components to that city component or section of the photo, I could come in here, get a basic mask. I can paste that same mask from the tools over there here into a local mask. And what I want to do is kind of warm up some of that area because it's got a little bit of a blue to it. So I don't want to go too heavy handed. You can see that the mask is applying there, but maybe warm it up just a little bit, take a little bit of that blue out of there. And if you wanted to, you could lift the exposure a tiny bit if you wanted to create a little bit more visibility into that part of the photo. But, once again, /key, and there you go. You can see where the mask has been applied. And so I think that's something else that people may not be aware of is once you create a mask, you can use it on all the filters here on the main tab, but you can also copy and paste those masks to and from local masking, which comes in really handy. And in this case, I think added a nice little final pop. Maybe it's a little bit too bright on the exposure, but maybe a little bit too warm. But the point is something like this, where it's a little bit cooler in the city, but I've created a bit of warmth in the other areas. You might want to come back and do some customization with a local mask. And that's, again, I love that about Luminar AI. I think a lot of people might use local masks early, and it's, obviously you can use them kind of in any order that you want. I tend to start on the main filters and then do my customization and finalization on local masking. And sometimes I'll add a new local mask, a basic one, and then just apply some things like a little bit of contrast, maybe pull down a little bit of highlights, pull up the shadows a little bit, and just apply that across the entire photo. So even though it's designed to be masked in because it's considered a local mask, you can actually just use all these sliders, which gives you the ability to duplicate some of the things that you may have used earlier on the main editing tab and use them down here instead, but apply it globally. So it's like having a second instance of that tool, which is handy.
So, Jim, we got about 4 minutes left, and I know time flies when people are all asking questions. One question people have that I'll just get out of the way. Trust us, folks. We've heard that you love the local masking tool and the texture overlay tool, and we will be bringing some improvements to those tools in the future. We're hard at work on that, so you'll see some awesome things in the future. We know that you want the ability to use multiple tools and overlays, and so you're going to see some cool stuff in the future. Jim, show us a couple more awesome things. People are loving this. And then the same thing I asked Jack, if you're willing, there's some questions in the chat pod and in the Q&A. If you have a minute or two to answer a couple of them afterwards, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So another image then?
You're welcome to. If there's something you want to show as a quick fix, if you've got a super secret thing, we've had some questions on composition AI. It might be a good one on this one with vertical, or I don't know what you want to show on this image, but I see a lot of potential here because you got a great sky. We put a lot of noise on sky replacement, but I just see a sky here that just needs a little enhancement.
Yeah, exactly. Composition AI I use all the time. I don't really need it on this photo. It's actually pretty straight already. But yeah, I think in this
I wasn't
case,
challenging your photography skills.
I didn't take it that way. But yeah, I mean, again, my way to add some accent AI, maybe pull a little sky enhancer. I would probably come down here and pull those highlights down a little bit. And then, once again, I would go to super contrast. And again, for me, it's about balancing the light. So you can see what this is doing to the sky, as Rich said. I mean, we've got a nice sky to work with. It just needs a little bit of, control, right? So don't want to go that way. I definitely want to go that way. Maybe add a little bit of mid-tone contrast and, something about like that, and shadows.
That's looking beautiful. You're right by color harmony. Would you mind just showing the amazing split color warmth tool in there as well? Because that's going to let you do even more there under that 2 down, the split color warmth.
Yeah.
This is another one of those secrets like super contrast that people miss.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. If you look at the like the front of the Vatican there's lights on right in here, and they're starting to pop along with the sky. So that really, that split color warmth is fantastic. Basically lets you amplify the warm colors here without amplifying anything else, which I love. Or you could do things with the cool colors if you want to amplify them, or kind of, if you go to the right, it kind of neutralizes them. I think I'm not going to worry about the cool ones, but yeah, the warm ones are great.
Yeah, I
And
just love that you had a beautiful yellow and gold sunset there and the reds. That was just so nice. And that gold on the front of the building is now just, it has that magical feeling of warmth.
yeah, yeah, it pops them quite a bit. So color harmony, I use a lot. I say that all the time about every tool. I use this tool every time, but I use it so much. I love color balance. That gets into probably a bit more than we have time for, but the amount of power and control that you have over light and color and detail, the key elements of a photograph in Luminar AI, I think is just unmatched. It's quick and powerful, and that's why I love it, and that's why I do all those videos about it that you're referring to. So yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And speaking of that, Jim, before you go, where
Yeah.
can people find you? I know they could just go to YouTube and type in Jim Nix, right?
Yeah, they can. So on YouTube, you can just go to youtube.com/Jim Nix and find me there. My blog is jimnix.com. And that's the primary place to find me. I don't do a whole lot of Instagram. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I'm on everything, just like everybody else. But I spend more of my time on YouTube probably than anywhere else. So that's probably the best place to find me, along with my blog.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Jim, we really appreciate you taking the time today to share. And
Yeah. Thank
that's
you.
awesome that you were here. If you've got a moment to answer a couple of questions in the chat pod, people would appreciate that. We're
Certainly.
going to take just a brief pause and share a little bit of information about World Oceans Day. We've
Nice.
got an amazing campaign that we've been doing, and we've partnered up with the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Group. And in just a moment, we're going to play a video about that to tell you a little bit about that program. And then when we come back, we're going to hear from our next guest who's got some great techniques to share. Jim, I really encourage people to check out your stuff. You do such a great job of
Appreciate
helping
it.
people with that information. So thank you for that.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Take care. I'll be in
Awesome.
the chat for a minute.
Thank you.